I kind of like talking during this because nobody's tuned in anyway. Not yet.
You do it every time. I'm here trying to be cool, just vibing with the music. But it's recorded, so it's the first thing people are going to hear. Sound like we just, I don't want to say it's unprofessional. Like, obviously now we're doing it's a gag, but come on, Grant.
Shit together. All right, let's fire it up. I think. All right. Everybody, welcome back to another episode of Litecoin Underground, Saturday Morning Underground. It's January 11th, 2025. Happy New Year. We've been on a bit of a break. I think this is the longest break I've taken from the whole making any content for a while. I haven't done spaces in a few weeks. I think the last video we did was maybe almost a month ago, maybe the January or December 15th or something. So hope you guys had a good Christmas, good New Year. Animal, did you get any good Christmas gifts that you can speak to?
Actually, yeah, man, I got something. I wasn't expecting it. I sent it to my girlfriend as a joke at some point during Black Friday. And she actually got it. We got this little projector. It's a Samsung Freestyle. We have it up on the headboard, so it projects up on the ceiling. It's really nice.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Does it pretty
Chromecast and stuff?
I saw Chief had one of those. I've been wanting to get one for a while, actually. I like in my basement, I have a kind of a wall. I'm like, I could do a drop down screen. It would be awesome to have like a 50-inch, 60-inch view. Is it pretty crystal clear?
It's not bad. I had to get blackout curtains on Amazon for it to work properly in the afternoon, but at night it's great. It's the kind of thing where like once we finish dinner and stuff and we're winding down, we don't like to sit in the living room. We typically go in the bedroom and read or whatever. But sometimes we want to watch one more episode, and so we'll do that. And it's nice because with it on the ceiling, you can be like laying down on your bed and not strain your neck.
Right.
So yeah, what about you? Anything interesting that
I am in peak dad mode. I got don't tell my family. I got some of the worst gifts I've ever gotten.
No kidding.
My one daughter was so excited. She likes graphic tees and these like socks that make your feet look goofy and stuff like that. She's 11, right? She bought me. I'm of the age Beavis and Butthead was big when I was 13 years old. I like Beavis and Butthead. I have like one. I always buy a joke 4th of July shirt every year, and I had one with Beavis and Butthead on it. So she bought me Beavis and Butthead underwear and Beavis and Butthead socks. So that was one of my big gifts. And then as far as what I got actually that I've been using, and I'm going to make some more today. We have an automatic bread maker. If you don't have one, or you're like you're non-carb guy.
Yeah, I don't do carbs.
But man, it is such a worthwhile investment. So we've had it for a while, and I've made bread here and there, and they bought me like a recipe book for making different types of bread. And I've been making focaccia bread for oh my god!
Oh yeah,
fresh focaccia.
Does it bake it as well?
Not the focaccia, but a lot of them it does. You basically throw the ingredients in, hit start, and whatever. A few hours later, you have a loaf of bread.
My grandmother used to do that, and it was amazing. She'd put like ham and cheese in the mixer, and it came out great. Like, yeah, you just put the ingredients in, press the button, and some really, really good bread. Yeah,
that's not a bad idea. So I do.
It does have that hole in the middle, right? Because there's the whole mixer.
It does, but you can take it out. The other thing is that you can just have it make the dough. So tonight I'm actually going to make a couple things of dough and try to make pizza crusts out of them, and we'll see what happens. So
cool.
So yeah, all different types of recipes. So that's probably the best thing. I don't know. I get all these ideas. I make a couple. I'm like, this is so good. Like you could sell this. Go like the farmer's market, just sell fresh bread. It's so much better than store-bought bread. And I think the reason I even got into it is because I go to the store and bread's like $5-6 a loaf, and it isn't even that good. It's all gummy. You're just like, this is garbage.
It's full of canola oil and stuff. And
yeah, right. It's all
oil. Junk you don't want. You can put your own olive oil in there.
Yep.
Exactly. Make it healthier.
Yeah. So that's probably the one I'm enjoying the most, and yeah, I'm going to use today. So, but probably most importantly, as we digress here, we got a good guest coming in today very shortly. George Selgin, who I feel like a little bit outside of our pay grade, you know what I'm saying? But I've been talking to him. We were going to have him in like a month and a half ago. We've had some back and forth just scheduling things. And it's, I came to know him from the Fed, from a discussion he was having about the Fed. But I've learned, a Bitcoin. He was on the original Bitcoin cypherpunk mailing, not the Bitcoin list, the cypherpunk mailing list from like the late 90s with Nick Szabo, who Nick Szabo created BitGold, and all those kind of earlier manifestations of pre-Bitcoin electronic currencies. Not as a coder, but as more of an economist and a free market thinker. So he's going to be on here in about 10 minutes. So I'm pretty excited about that. We're going to talk about the Fed a little bit, strategic Bitcoin reserve. Before he comes on, I did want to talk about the fires out in California. Animal and I, sometimes I forget when we were recording, when we were not. Animal and I were talking about that beforehand. I don't know I haven't woken up and looked at the news this morning. I hope they're having it under control, but man, it's been rough to watch, as a homeowner. I think I might have even made a post about this one time, about how the things that you buy in your life mark like little marks on the calendar of like, I remember when I bought that, or I remember one time I was in my garage, I bought that sled and our kids and I went sledding, or I bought this to fix this on the house, or you just have these stories in your mind that are connected to the things you own. And I just can't even imagine that stuff just being fully vaporized, everything gone, flattened. It's just horrible, man, what's going on. And I hope we can get away from like having some empathy for these people, no matter how rich they were, whatever their political views are, or whatever. It's just been really awful. And so I'm not a prayer, but prayers for those people, because it's really rough.
Yeah. No, I know Chief's out there, Chief Litecoin. Yeah. I don't think he's I think he's in Compton, right? And so
I think he's far away from it.
But I've been seeing reports of arson. Apparently a lot of these fires are man-made, which is just absolutely deplorable. Like, we had a similar issue in Quebec here a couple of years ago, where there were a bunch of fires in areas that never had fires up north. It turns out someone started them. You must remember, you guys got smoked down in Ohio.
Those were man-made.
Yeah,
that was somebody. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, well, I didn't find out until weeks after, right?
Yep, I had to go to Minnesota that year, and I was in northern Michigan that year. I mean, how long did those burn? That was months and months, right?
Yeah. It was a tinderbox to start with, and perhaps one started naturally, and then there were people that got the bright ideas, like, hey, I can really mess stuff up if I just dropped a couple of matches here and there.
Yeah,
I was on my walk. So, yeah, absolutely deplorable. And then, of course, there's the whole aspect of the insurance companies not covering people for fire damage recently. Like, there's just these people with nothing, Obviously, these fires are happening in wealthier neighborhoods. People have a lot more to lose. Perhaps they have stuff squirreled away somewhere. They're not going to be out of a home forever. But I'm sure there are a lot of people that won't have that option. The old folks residence that we saw comes to mind. Or what happens to them after they've lost all their belongings and they've got nowhere to go. I hope people take care of them.
Yeah, there's a little bit, I feel like there's some things that happen that just bring to the surface like this broad variety of topics and angles you could look at it. Like, I look at it, like you mentioned, the arsonist. I did see some video yesterday of there was a guy in his car, like two buddies in the car, and they saw somebody. Like, yeah, did you see that? And they were pouring water on these little fires. This guy, and who knows? He's just some idiot on the side of the road, thinks it's who knows. But these people, yeah, they're deplorable. But like, I think they've reached a point where there's people just like burn it all down, right? They feel so hopeless, and people like that. The insurance guy, Luigi, whatever his name is, where there's people cheering that on, and you're like, what has caused this side of things? Like, that's just bizarre, disgusting behavior. Like, how have we reached as a society? Like, this inability to, or to the point, yeah, we've created so many people that actually don't see this as this horrible thing, or that the instant they see it, they aren't like, oh man, that's horrible. Their instance is like, well, Gavin Newsom sucks. It's like, what the dude? Are you seriously? Yeah, is there mismanagement? Okay, but that doesn't mean we gloss over the fact these people are victims of this. They're not perpetuating this, and they are, just like I said, they're your neighbors. They're people just like you. And would you want that to happen to you or somebody you cared about? Like, no, I mean, no, of course not.
It's an opportunity for them to grandstand and put the other guy down.
Right. Yeah.
Does that actually help anything?
No, but it might get you some clicks. Might get you some clicks and some likes, and that's what's more important.
Exactly.
In the attention economy, is that what they would call it? The click economy we're in. So interesting thought, though. That that might be a whole. This is the type of stuff I think I told you. I had a conversation yesterday with that rare passenger, and like Elon has encouraged the right. He is paying people to get clicks directly, and so saying things that feed into the base emotions are what will make people
drive engagement.
We financially incentivize people to encourage your gut instinct to be angry, and rationality is the enemy at this point in time. So it's a very deep topic. I really think those fires could be something I hope they go out soon. But they bring up a lot of topics, and unfortunately, in 2 weeks we'll all be talking about something else and move on, I guess. But I'd like to continue to explore that stuff. So
maybe 2 weeks is a little bit too soon, but yeah, I agree. While the people who lose their homes and everything in them will certainly never forget.
Yeah, I did see a map that was really interesting to me because I don't understand the scale of LA. They showed it overlaid. There was a Great Chicago Fire way back. Remember I made that post about the Great Chicago Fire? I said it was really a cow kicking over a lantern. I don't know if you know the Great. I don't know if that's an American history thing. To me. There's a story. There was a huge Chicago fire in 1870 or something, and it supposedly started from this Miss O'Leary's cow kicked over a lantern. It's like folklore, but it's real. Okay. Apparently, this is the true story we're told is reality. And I was kind of making a joke, like I look at today, like we would look at that story and be like, bullshit. There's no way somebody set that fire on purpose. But the size of the fire today is something like 10 times the size of downtown Chicago. It's just so broad. LA's so huge compared to like the Midwest or the old cities. So I'm waiting to see. George is in the queue here, so he's just got to turn on his camera and mic. So once he comes back, if you're listening, George, fire up. We'll get you in here. So while he's getting ready, and we'll talk about his book towards the end. But George Selgin, let me get his bio right. I always like to read these things rather than try to memorize them or write them down. Hang on a second. He is part of the CATO Institute. He has an official role there, so I don't want to get it wrong. Director Emeritus of the CATO Institute. And like I said, part of the Bitcoin OG. His book coming out is called False Dawn. It's coming out in March, so it's a ways out. You've got some time. But he's got a long list of books. Economist. I saw an inventor on his Wikipedia page of some optical measuring devices or something. But it's called False Dawn, The New Deal, and the Promise of Recovery, 1933 to 1947. Kind of an analysis, what he was telling us of some of the programs and the impact of those. So here he is. There we go. We got him. Here we go. Hey, George.
I'm here. How you guys doing?
Good. We got you in. Thanks for coming on. We had a little bit of a pre-conversation, but if you don't mind, I always like to let the guest introduce themselves just so I don't miss something important that you would want to have. I know your list is long, so I don't want to miss something that you wanted to see.
Well, I'm George Selgin, and I'm the ex-director, director emeritus of the Cato Institute's Center for Monetary and Financial Alternatives. I'm also an emeritus professor at University of Georgia, where I taught economics for 25 years. But I still work at Cato today as a senior fellow.
And you were on the original Cypherpunk mailing list, right?
That's right. That's what I understand. I certainly was on this little list at the time. None of us knew that we were being cypherpunks. That I think that name came later, but I was on the list and did have a lot of exchanges with some of the folks who seem to have played an important part later on, not while this was going on, but ultimately in creating Bitcoin. But Bitcoin didn't appear for, another more than 10 years after the conversations on that list shut down. So when it actually appeared, it was a surprise to me. So that gives you some idea of just how limited my role was.
It was kind of just a thing were you like, did you like move it into the, like, please send these files to you didn't move it to the junk folder or unsubscribe or something, did you?
Oh, that's a good question. The problem is, if those messages still exist, I suspect they're pretty hard to dig out. I've moved several times since I left the University of Georgia, but I think some people have kept those mailings, so you can look at them somewhere. But
Right.
I haven't tried to track them down on my own computer.
You feel like that what has become of Bitcoin is, that might be a better, the original manifestation of Bitcoin, let's say that. Do you think that the motivations of those creating it were pretty fulfilled? I mean, the goal seemed to always be a stateless money.
That's right. Yes.
That couldn't be defrauded. That might be the best way to, like, basic, can't be censored, can't be defrauded.
Couldn't be defrauded and couldn't be shut down easily by state authorities or otherwise manipulated by them. That was the goal. That's why Larry White and I were involved in the cypherpunk mailing list, because we had written about free market money. Mm-hmm. So those folks were trying to reinvent, as it were, free market money, because Larry and I talked about past free market monetary systems. And that's why they were interested in what we had to say. But their goal was indeed to create another monetary system that was free market, and free market, from scratch, right, without any involvement of the state. I would say, in answer to your question, that the way Bitcoin has shaped up is rather different from what those original discussions were concerned with. It is used as a medium of exchange. Of course, it's mostly off-chain transactions are being used because they're less costly. That's fine. That's all consistent with what people were talking about. Hal Finney wanted to have a second layer that was just an ordinary fractional reserve banking system. But now we have these alternatives that are rather more technically distinct. Mm-hmm. But what hasn't happened is its widespread adoption for ordinary exchanges. Is still a niche medium of exchange for the most part. There are some communities where it's more widely used, and it has become a lot easier for people with Bitcoin to engage in ordinary exchanges with it, but by using software that converts to the official currency, which still is what most sellers of most things want to receive. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, Bitcoin has proven phenomenally successful as an investment asset. And that, I don't think anybody really anticipated, that it would be seen as a kind of rival, that it would not just be seen, but become a rival to gold in many respects, as an alternative savings medium. and a hedge against depreciation of national currencies. And so that has been exceptional, that success. I don't think anybody in 2009 was thinking of Bitcoin having the price it has today, let alone still a lot of potential for continuing to appreciate.
Sorry, I'm trying to hit something.
No, that's true. I mean, as evident by that pizza being sold for all those thousands of Bitcoin, right?
Yeah,
I guess.
I mean, I don't even think it was. I think it was. Yeah, it was thousands. It was each Bitcoin was worth a trivial amount.
Right.
It's kind of ironic in a way that this is a long conversation about scarcity we could talk about and its relation to value, but that the scarcity part is what has been sold as the thing that brings Bitcoin value, and it's caused the interest and the excitement and the value of it to go up so much, and has recruited so many people to it.
That's right. That's right. The fact that Bitcoin has an absolute scarcity built into it, where
Right.
the number of coins will never be more than 21 million, makes it uniquely scarce in the sense that other commodities are not so scarce. Gold, for example, we know there's only a limited amount of it in the ground, but we haven't found all of it yet, so we don't know how limited.
Right.
For example, so on the one hand, you have this absolutely limited supply. Now, that in itself isn't going to make the value positive, or let alone rise. You've got to generate demand, and that's the impressive thing that Bitcoin has done. It hasn't just solved the problem of creating an asset with an ultimately fixed supply. It has created demand for that asset that has been skyrocketing. And that's even more impressive.
Because I think I've seen in some other interviews, you've kind of said that, well, it's not really, maybe it doesn't meet the complete definition of money because of its lack of real common use, right?
That's right. That's right.
All right. So do you feel like in an ironic way that, like, if it didn't have the fixed supply story to tell, that it would maybe, so let's say it inflated 1% a year in perpetuity or 2%, would it, would that make people go out and buy it or actually use it? But in a way it would have the inverse effect of that it wouldn't have as much value because the story couldn't be told. Right? Because that's kind of what the scarcity is, the story to tell, right?
Yes. No, I think there's something to what you're saying, Grant, because, well, we know very well that a lot of people think it's crazy to spend your Bitcoin because they anticipate further appreciation. Well, if people don't spend it, if everybody's a hodler, of course, it can't become a generally accepted or generally used medium of exchange. It couldn't become one even if sellers were all willing to accept it, because nobody would want to pass it on. So conversely, when a medium of exchange is not an exceptional store of value, could be a pretty mediocre store of value, which most monies are, actually. Some are downright terrible. Then that certainly overcomes people's reluctance to spend the stuff. And that is one requirement, it's not the only one, for anything to be widely used as money. People have to be treating it as something they're willing to pass on, and not just something they want to hold on to for the sake of a positive return. So I agree with you. One factor that is working against Bitcoin's wider use as money is the fact that it is such a good store of value, has proven such a good investment, and that's a whole different purpose.
I mean, you could also argue that because transaction fees are so high, people lose too much on each transaction.
And well, that's certainly true. Certainly true for on-chain transactions, less so for off-chain, but it is still not as cheap, all things considered, as some other forms of payment, or at least I should say its cheapness is less consistent because usually the cost of transacting isn't a constant in most of these cases. It depends on when you use it and where.
Yeah, and the fact that the banks have made it so hard for companies and fintechs to operate within the crypto space certainly had a chilling effect, right? Choke point 2.0 closed a whole bunch of businesses down.
That's
one, I'm
right.
not sure if you've heard of. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, getting back to Hal Finney's vision, right? He saw banks getting very much involved in Bitcoin and taking deposits, making loans, et cetera, so that the banks' substitutes would do for Bitcoin what they've done for fiat monies and what they did for gold in the past. And that vision, of course, has not taken hold, partly because the authorities won't let it. Not entirely, but they really are standing in the way of that potential development.
Yeah, it's the hard, the thing about anything when you use the phrases cypherpunk, or it's a black market money, or it's a non-government approved money. There's a very small portion of the population that says, "Hey, I don't care if this is against the rules. I'm going to do it." For the most part, what we've learned, people are surprisingly loyal to the authorities. Whether it's
Well, the very conservative people are conservative, but don't forget too that there's a basic network effect, or network externality, as it's sometimes called, at work here, which is that whenever you have a really widely established money, anything that's an upstart is going to face an uphill battle trying to unseat it, or shun it aside. So that would be there even if it weren't for these other factors. Even if it weren't for the state being against the stuff or hostile to it, you'd still have a tough time. Market innovators do overcome these network advantages. They manage to make inroads, and Bitcoin has done that. It's got more than a foothold, which is remarkable in itself. But it's a big slog anyway. Even under the best circumstances, to shove aside certainly a currency like the dollar, which has a gigantic established network worldwide, not just in the United States. So that's the hardest currency for Bitcoin to really compete with, is the US dollar.
Yeah, what do you think of the alignment, with because I agree, like we've been doing Twitter Spaces I did them for 3+ years every week, and we would always venture into these weird conversations because the financial world gets its tentacles into everything. And when you start to understand how these monies work against each other, and it's interesting, and what's developed in the last year is, the stable coins have established themselves as having real value and real use case in a lot of parts of the world, because it loses that cost somewhat to use. It allows people access to the dollar that never had it before. They would love to have, you go to a foreign country sometimes 20 years ago, they would love to have the dollar. They would have a premium to them, and now they can access it on their phone. And so,
before they had to actually use cash, Federal Reserve note.
So you had to have somebody come in from another country to actually get that cash, right? So exactly. With Tether establishing itself as becoming this amazingly powerful player, despite its grayness, and them buying, treasuries, and this almost alignment. You even hear Michael Saylor talk a lot about it. I mean, what do you think are they doing something that's putting the federal government in a situation where, is Tether becoming like almost like a decentralized, I shouldn't call it that, a non-Federal Reserve central bank?
No, I wouldn't say it's becoming a non-Federal Reserve central bank, because then it would be able to influence interest rates and the general supply of dollars as much as the Fed can, and that's not the case. I think a better analogy isn't with a central bank with a parallel Fed, but with the euro dollar market, which has long existed as an offshore dollar system with banks that is not part of the regulatory umbrella of the United States. Ultimately, the euro dollars, their quantity is also influenced by the Fed. So the Fed does have some indirect role there. But the euro dollar market is largely an unregulated market. I suppose you could call it a gray market. It's not illegal, but it's outside of the regulatory umbrella of the U.S. Stable coins, of course, have their own special niche that they fulfill. I think they could do a lot more in the way of being substitutes for Federal Reserve currency and for bank deposits if the U.S. government allowed stablecoin issuers to be a little less gray. We have to remember that they're gray partly because they want to be, but partly because they're not allowed to play on the regulated playing field that ordinary private dollar issuers, meaning banks and mutual funds, play on. And I think that we would have different kinds of stable coins, white stable coins, if they could be admitted, and I think those white stable coins would look different and perform differently. Among other things, they would have a more consistent value with the dollar. They would trade at par, just like bank deposits, all the time, instead of wandering about par, because there would be an active system of redemption like there is for bank monies today in the United States.
It's kind of ironic that they do exist still in this gray market, and that they don't have. I guess USDC would be considered more of a mainstream and accepted version.
Yes, they've tried to become more mainstream. They have applied for Fed master account and that sort of thing, but they've been limited in their success. So we still don't have good examples of stable coins that are truly mainstream, that want to be part of the an integrated part of the U.S. payment system with banks and mutual funds and other actors.
Do you think they've had a measurable effect on inflation at this point?
You mean the
stable
coins that exist? It's hard to say, of course. They are contributing to the total money supply. They do make a contribution. But of course, the ultimate determinants of inflation, putting supply side considerations aside, it's really up to the Federal Reserve to regulate the amount of private money creation all around. When it tightens, for example, by raising interest rates, it tightens for everyone, whether they're white, black, or gray issuers of dollar substitutes. And so it's not as if what I wouldn't want to suggest is that these stable coins are somehow rogues that prevent the Fed from being responsible for inflation. That isn't true. The Fed has every ability to control it, as it would have if none of them existed.
Yeah, I'm of the belief that, first of all, I found it interesting that you just said that Tether is a form of money creation, because if we're to believe the story, all deposits are reflected in dollars. It's not creating new dollars.
Well, that's not quite true. That would be true if tethers were backed 100% by Federal Reserve assets or literal Federal Reserve notes, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they're backed by treasuries, and that means that actually the amount of tethers created isn't strictly tied to the existence of Federal Reserve dollars themselves. There's added dollars being created this way, just like banks. If a U.S. bank has reserves, let's say, of 2% of their or 5% of their liabilities, and the rest is invested in loans, it doesn't matter whether those loans are commercial loans or mortgages, or loans to the U.S. government, because the banks invest in treasuries.
Okay.
Those banks are still creating dollars, and doing so in a way that's not fundamentally different from what Tether does when it creates dollar substitutes backed by government bonds.
So, look, what I wanted to get into with that is, I'm surprised the Fed, and maybe they have something on the books they may not want to create a stable coin, and they may be happy to let Tether do it for them because it's always easier to subcontract because you can wash your hands of it later. But I kind of feel like Tether has actually acted to reduce inflation because it's, inflation is this balance between, like Bitcoin, a good example. I mean, and Litecoin's the same, right? They both have this expanding supply in the beginning. And the answer to that is more users. Like you have to have more adoption to spread those dollars into. And what Tether's done is effectively put those dollars into people's hands that, like we just said earlier, couldn't get them before. So the user base of the US dollar is growing. And I think it'll slowly erode these other currencies. Like a lot of smaller countries' currencies will lose out to Tether before they're going to lose out to faster than they would have ever lost out to the dollar in the past. Is there an inverse relationship between user base and money supply? It's like if your population grows 10%, that's an effective shrinking of your money supply if it doesn't change.
Yeah, if all that Tether was doing was enhancing the demand for dollars, that would be correct. But as I said, they're also contributing to the supply. So it's not clear that
Right.
the overall balance is one that works against inflation. I don't think it contributes much to inflation because of what you're saying, that they're creating, there's a market that they're tapping for dollars that might not be tapped otherwise. And if the new dollars that are created are only satisfying a new market, new source of demand for dollars, then those things cancel and you don't necessarily get more inflation. So, but of course, it's also possible that Tether is taking the place of US dollar paper currency. And in that case, it could end up, in theory, it could end up being inflationary if the Fed didn't compensate, because then you'd have less demand for the base because the substitutes are not fully backed. And that would mean that on the whole, you've got a little bit more money creation. The Fed, of course, is always responsible for compensating for such developments, just as it compensates if we decide to stop Christmas shopping and put our cash back in the banking system. It doesn't let the price level rise when that happens. It knows what's coming and it makes adjustments accordingly.
So do you think there's a level at which Tether becomes, it's 100 billion plus right now, where it starts to have a meaningful impact on even like Fed policy and interest rates? And then as a sidebar to that, do you think the Fed is going to create its own crypto stablecoin, whether it's, backed by whatever it is? That feels like it's on the horizon. It's got to be on the horizon, right?
Yeah, on the first question, I'm not sure. I'm honestly not sure. The dollar system is huge. And though Tether's a huge player, I'm not sure it's that big compared to
maybe
the
like
whole
10 trillion or something. I mean, is there a level at which you go, man, this thing?
I suppose 10 trillion might do it. Yeah. But yeah, that could happen. On your other question, as you know, the Fed has been encouraged to play around with the idea of a central bank digital currency. So far, though, both it and other central banks that are doing that have their idea, or the kind of central bank digital currencies they're toying with, are mostly deposit based. So they're not digital in the sense of that stable coins are. They're just basically bank deposits that people get to hold with the Federal Reserve directly. Now, whether the Fed will do that much is not clear yet. I hope not. But I don't see any inclination on their part to get into the stable coin business with a Federal Reserve equivalent of a stable coin. They kind of rejected that option some time ago in their discussions of building a central bank digital currency. They went in a much more technically conservative direction.
Okay. I think
so
stepped on an animal.
Yeah. So what you have, I know it sounds a little funny, but the name central bank digital currency is very, very misleading because, the only thing they're really contemplating is that you and I could have an account with the Fed, and they aren't even contemplating it quite as straightforwardly as that. We would open these accounts, we would deal with with ordinary banks that would act as managers for accounts that are actually accounts at the Fed for private individuals. That's what they're calling central bank digital currency. And of course, it's just bank deposits. It's not high tech. It's not
might it be
stable.
that one day USDC then just receives a Federal Reserve master account and gets US dollars sent directly to them?
I would like to see that. I've argued in favor of the Fed establishing master accounts for qualified stablecoin issuers. What I mean by qualified is the Fed can impose any rules they like, but they can't just say no with no reason. Okay. So the qualifications could be almost anything. I've suggested, as a very modest step, that they allow stablecoin issuers to have master accounts if they back their coins 100% with Fed reserves, which is the thing that they don't do now. I said, I'm not saying that this has to be a regulation. I'm saying at least let them join if they do that. That's what I'm saying.
Did you, maybe for our listeners, because I didn't learn about master accounts until I started doing research on you for this podcast.
Step back and talk about what those are. So
yes, please.
The Federal Reserve is a big bank, a very special bank that basically mostly has two clients. One is the federal government. The other is banks, other banks, ordinary commercial banks. And almost every ordinary commercial bank has an account at the Fed. And those accounts are called master accounts. But they're just the bank's accounts at the Fed. And the money that's in those accounts, the dollars that are in those accounts that banks hold, they're part of their reserves. They are equivalent to the banks held a bunch of Federal Reserve notes in their vaults. But of course, it's safer to just have, as it were.
When you say Federal Reserve note, you mean like cash?
Yeah. Okay. Instead of holding cash on hand, right? They have the Federal Reserve credits in a Federal Reserve bank account. So the Fed is acting as the source of reserves in both cases, but in one case it's much more convenient. Now, it's also convenient not only because nobody can come in and steal it, right? But those deposits accounts are used to settle accounts among the different banks in the banking system. So every day you have a bunch of people that are writing checks or swiping debit cards, etc., from their banks. And at the end of the day, the banks settle up with each other because transfers are being made from Bank A to Bank B and Bank B to, say, Bank C to Bank A. And what they do when they settle up is simply the Federal Reserve simply credits the net creditor banks, the ones that have gained overall from all these transactions once you net them out, and debits the master accounts of the debtor banks. And so those accounts are used for settling accounts among the different banks. And this is how our payment system works. You and I and other ordinary people make our payments and settle with the people we're buying and selling from using our bank money, our deposits. Right. And then the banks settle among themselves at the end of the day using their funds they have in their master accounts to make the necessary payments to other banks.
So to correlate to Bitcoin, the regional banks would be kind of like a layer 2.
Yes, the regular banks would be layer 2. And their funds at the Fed are layer 1, part of along with currency, they constitute the so-called monetary base. So the monetary base in plain old-fashioned monetary economics, monetary base is layer 1.
And so when the Federal Reserve prints money, right? When they do these things, increase rates, decrease rates, and all that stuff. They they leverage the master accounts, right? They'll send certain banks, I don't know how many billions of dollars, right, to pad their books, or is that
Used
not
to work. It used to work that way.
okay?
Animal. It used to work that way. Things changed in 2008. In the old days, the banks had very few reserves that they relied on as their basis for supporting their own deposits to their customers. And if the Fed wanted to change conditions, it just created more reserves, and it would do that by, well, it would do that by going out buying securities in the open market, and then the security dealers would take the proceeds and deposit them in the banking system. So that's how the banks ended up with more money in their master accounts. Now, what's happened since 2008 is the banking system has been flooded with reserves, trillions of dollars of reserves, when they used to have relatively small, hundreds of millions. And so now banks have all the reserves. They have more reserves than they actually need. And they're encouraged to hold those reserves by the Fed paying interest on those reserves. And that it didn't used to do. Your deposits in master accounts used to not bear any interest. So banks that had extra reserves got rid of them quick by lending them out because they weren't earning anything. They held on to only what they needed for those settlements or what they expected to need. Now, they're encouraged to hold on to oodles of reserves with interest that the Fed pays, and they only make other loans when they can earn more on other loans than by just sitting on reserves. So the way the Federal Reserve regulates monetary conditions today is just by adjusting that interest rate on reserves. Makes it higher to discourage the banks from making more loans and creating more money, and makes it lower when it thinks it wants the system to ease up a little bit. And so the interest rate on reserves is now the key variable the Fed regulates. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but that will, I think, do for now to explain what monetary policy has become. It's become a question of the Fed setting the rate that it pays on bank reserves.
Yeah, I wanted to get into this a little bit. I know and we still got some time, but so I've had this recent, I know Cato Institute's a libertarian entity. And obviously the Fed is a private bank, but obviously very intertwined with the government. So it a bit goes against the idea of libertarianism. And I've been struggling a little bit with I've been struggling a bit with the libertarian concept just recently. For a long time, I was in it, and a good example is these fires in California. And because a lot of libertarianism depends on insurance, right? Like you have to, rather than there being a government entity, it's like you take private insurance out to protect yourself from these catastrophic events. And I wonder, in like what I see the Fed is, and what I can see it being so valuable to have this buyer of last resort, so to speak, is when you have events occur that are unforeseen, you have insurance companies that would go completely under and just say, I'm bankrupt. Sorry, I got nothing. And you have to have a way to protect the people that were not acting in bad faith, did everything in good faith. And it'd be ultimately destructive to society not to have a way to, frankly, spread that damage across society as opposed to with whatever 100,000 people in a certain area.
Yes.
And I've always viewed the Fed as like this kind of like ballast tank or whatever you would call that, or I have a furnace system. You got to have a little air system to like the bad times of. So, do you think that in a perfect world, the Fed is the current banking system is the right system if it were governed properly, and that if these monies like cryptocurrencies and gold were allowed to fairly compete, it would keep the Fed in check to a degree? But that it's like at the end of the day, every government needs to have some sort of ability to absorb these potential catastrophic events.
Well, this is, of course, a huge theme, the question of just how safe a banking system can be without a central bank. And I think the only way to approach it correctly is to study economic history, because one of the things that happens if you do that carefully is you learn that central banks were destabilizing institutions originally. That is, the very fact that they have these institutions vested with monopoly powers makes them extremely dangerous. And if you go back and look at the history of central banking, and of banking generally, you learn two things. One is that sometimes the central banks themselves are the real cause of instability, very often in history. And the other is that there are all kinds of other bank regulations that have been a cause of instability and losses in the past. The United States has always had one of the worst banking systems in the world. In our particular banking history, with all the troubles and all the losses that banknote holders and depositors have suffered, in many cases, bad regulations were to blame, and better regulatory procedures, including a better structure for the banking industry, and including not having a central bank, could have made the systems much better. The reason Larry and I study free banking, Larry White, is because we know that there have been past banking systems without central banks that were much more stable than the ones with central banks. And we're trying to explain why, understand why, explain why, explore what other reasons there may have been for these systems being stable. But the bottom line is that central banking is not necessarily a stabilizing thing, and there are other ways to create stability. Now, I'm not for abolishing the Fed, simply because there's no easy way to do that, and you have to have a money, and since we're all holding dollars, pretty much, as well as some other stuff, in your cases more than mine probably, but you don't want to pull the rug from under that. Talk about wanting to not have people suffer losses from bank failures. Well, of course, if you abolish the Fed, you've put the value of the dollar in question.
There's a lot of people, George, that would love for the dollar to be worth nothing because they have
I know
in debt, right?
We still have all that gold right in Fort Knox that is doing what exactly?
I got a house. If that dollar goes worthless, I pay the house off next week. It's great.
The gold isn't doing a thing, actually. It's there's no connection anymore between the gold stocked up in Fort Knox and elsewhere and the dollar. We can't count on that gold to keep the dollar's value if we abolish the Fed. But by the way, the Fed doesn't own that gold. The Treasury does. The Fed doesn't own any of it at all. So the gold isn't part of the Fed's assets. Anyway, I don't want to abolish the Fed. I don't want to bulldoze, the Eccles building in Washington and wait to see what happens. I think that, like you said, Grant, what we want is to have competition. We want an even playing field where suppliers of substitutes, including both substitute dollars and substitutes for the dollar, have as much ability to compete fairly with the Federal Reserve and with regulated banks as possible. And, I think there are legitimate grounds for concern that we don't want to let new entrants into the dollar business, for example, have an advantage over established banks. We don't want them to be artificially advantaged. But that it still means we can do a lot more to make it fair for them to compete than we are doing by not even allowing them to have master accounts and not even allowing anybody to have a bank account at all if they deal with cryptocurrencies and stable coins and all that. This is absurd. This is really, really, really a far cry from the level playing field ideal that I think we both believe in.
I suppose it would be necessary for them to pass an audit before being given a master account.
Yes, of course. Yeah, they would have to go through the same hoops that every bank goes through to get a master account. They don't hand them out willy-nilly, but they do routinely hand them out. Most banks get them. most banks that apply get them. There are very few cases of banks being denied master accounts. Remember that these banks, before they can even apply, they have to have charters. They either have a state charter or they have a national charter. So they've already had to pass through a bunch of hoops to get the charters. So that for the most part, what the Fed does is it says, yeah, you got a charter, okay, blah, 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 here's your master account. No big deal. You can't be a bank without it. But its attitude toward non-banks, fintechs generally, and stablecoin issuers in particular has been quite different. Now, they don't have charters, it's true. Well, give them a way to have a charter then, give them a way, make it possible for them to be banks. You have to do that first, and then you can make it possible for them to have master accounts. But they should be able to accommodate these innovators. Otherwise, good financial payment innovations can't happen if the attitude is, oh, these things are scary, so we're going to keep them out by hook or by crook. And, yeah, you keep out some bad stuff that way, sure.
Mm-hmm.
But you keep out the good. And that's not ideal. You want to have a regulatory regime that provides room for the good innovations to take place and doesn't try to treat the status quo ante, the old-fashioned banking system, as sacrosanct, as if nothing could ever improve upon it. But that's the attitude that our regulators have taken to a very considerable extent.
Is the motivation
up to this point?
Is the motivation protectionism of the status quo for the most part?
Yeah, I think it's a mixture. It's a mixture of the fact that the bankers, of course, are being protected, the old-fashioned bankers, though some of them would like to perhaps get involved in these innovations. It's a mixture of catering to the established banks and outright fear, genuine fear, right?
Mm-hmm.
All bureaucrats always tend to be more worried about letting something bad happen than they are worried about not letting something good happen, for a very simple reason. When something bad happens, everybody notices. When something good doesn't happen, nobody notices.
Yeah.
So what would you do if you were a bureaucrat? You'd cover your ass by making sure you didn't let anything bad happen, and that creates a regulatory bias against innovation. You see that in the FDA, for example, in its conduct, but it happens in other regulatory realms as well, and it's something that has to be fought against because it is a bias. It's not giving you the optimal regulatory policy.
Do you have optimism? Because, Animal, I don't know if you listened to he and I talking a little before we were on the air. I've said this before, I know Trump's not like the guy who decides all the things, right? He's just this figurehead at this point. Do you feel like at these levels of the people actually making the rules and maybe the Fed and the large banks, are the adults in the room, are they rationally thinking this way, or is it like you just said? Are almost all of them motivated by cover your ass, and they don't even want to start having reasonable conversations about how do we maximize realistically what I think could be the proliferation of the dollar across the world? Frankly, that would be that's the crazy part. Bitcoin may introduce a dollarized world almost. What do you think that's happening, or do you think they're just going to ignore it long enough that we end up missing out on an opportunity, or what do you think is going to happen?
It's a matter of personalities. I characterized bureaucrats a little while ago, and what I meant to describe was a common tendency, but it's not universal. So changing personalities can make a difference. You can get some who are more open to innovation and less afraid of it. Of course, even within any administration, you can have different people taking different views. An example is with the attitude toward Bitcoin. Some years ago, Powell was very open and not inclined to be hostile to Bitcoin and to banks that did business with Bitcoin and all that. But Janet Yellen read him the Riot Act, said, we're not going to back you up if you start indulging in these innovations. And so, they had this clash. If you get the right people in enough places, if you get the adults in enough rooms, then of course, I think we can have a better policy outcome. So it does matter who is holding what position. That makes a difference. And of course, we're seeing a lot of change. We're in the midst of a great deal of reshuffling of these regulatory responsibilities. And I'm guardedly optimistic that the reshuffling is going to make things better.
Yeah, I'm as well, but agree with the guarded part. You can only be so optimistic, right? You don't know who's a snake in the grass. But go ahead, Animal. I feel like I keep cutting you off, Animal.
No, it's we're almost an hour into this, and I think it's time we gave a shout out to our sponsor, Cake Wallet.
Oh,
before we forget, and then afterwards, I think I would like to talk about George's upcoming book, False Dawn: The New Deal and the Promise of Recovery, 1933 to 1947. So yeah, if you haven't heard about Cake Wallet by now, you should go check it out. It's a crypto toolkit / blockchain suite. They've got DeFi, ChatGPT built into it, or Nano GPT rather. You could swap in and out and get your crypto into Nano. I think
you can actually use your money too, George. Do you know
actually use your money?
I don't know if you're a user of crypto, George, but you can actually.
I don't use it much. No, I don't use it very much. You could say
it's also
hodler.
No, okay. It's also the first wallet to have MWeb built into it, which is really nice to have.
That I know about, yes.
And it's quite an elegant implementation. Yeah. What else? You can do Cake Pay and stuff. It's great.
Yeah.
Check it out.
I am curious because obviously it's a Litecoin show. You may not know much about Litecoin. It's the second oldest coin. It's been it's pretty much a clone of Bitcoin, right? It's same cap supply, all that. And really the mantra for
larger cap, isn't it? Much larger, the number.
It's 4 times the amount, but
of course it's a nominal amount, fixed. So it doesn't really
right.
I suppose it's not that meaningful, but
it's the whole pizza conversation, right? You can divide it into more pieces, but it's still stacked. It's still
and there's less loss too, right?
But the focus really has been from the beginning, and we've always been proponents of using it, like you've been talking about. Like I've always felt like the big scary thing to me with Bitcoin is that if you don't have like an underlying utility to it beyond store of value, if and when that store of value narrative runs out, just because there's only so much speculation people can make and there's only so many dollars you can put into this thing, what's that underlying thing that drives the reason that people actually want to buy it beyond speculation? Or are we in going to have a huge up and then a long down before we really even find that market value of a stateless money? Or do you think we've kind of reached that, and that the speculation itself is the use case?
Well, I don't want to rule out the possibility that the medium of exchange role of Bitcoin will become more and more important over time. It's become important, so it's already there. There is a medium of exchange role, a limited one, but as you suggest, the more that role gets developed, the more important it becomes, the more solid the foundation is for Bitcoin's value. Because if it's all speculation, then of course the equilibrium is more tenuous, and it can go down a lot more easily and a lot further. But so that can still change. It's still early. I'll say one thing about Litecoin indirectly. When I first wrote about the theory of Bitcoin as an example of a potential synthetic commodity money. I actually wrote that back in 2011, and pointing out how this was the first of a new class of potential monies. And that what interested me was the class, because I thought at the time that Bitcoin was just the first, and there would be others. And there had already been, I think Litecoin was introduced by the time I wrote that paper, and I may not have been paying attention to that. But the point is, I never thought of Bitcoin as the first and the last of this category of new potential exchange media. And I look forward to seeing continuing innovation leading to improvements, going far beyond what Bitcoin itself was capable of. And I have always thought it was very weird for so many presumably or ostensibly free market types who liked Bitcoin to treat it as the last word, as if there would never be any other innovation that could potentially prove more successful, even more successful. That's not how markets work. It's very rare that the first is the last. That's why we're not flying. We're not flying in Wright brothers airplanes, and so I very much like to see rivals to Bitcoin using similar technology with the same advantages that I pointed out in that paper, but trying to innovate in ways that can potentially make them more successful, particularly as money. And so that's always been my position.
Yeah, it goes back to the free market thing, right? You want to have multiple options for people to play with, but there is also limited mind space. There's limited social space, right? And that's been the interesting part about talking about these things so extensively, is you start to understand there's so much of it is the social element. There has to be this agreed upon social contract and an unspoken understanding across the world that something has value is not as easy to it's not very easy to establish, right?
Yes,
across languages and cultures, everything.
It's remarkable that the Bitcoin has and Litecoin, that there's they have shown themselves to have some real staying power, and that's a lesson. If I were asked a long time ago whether such a thing, inconvertible into anything, without any established network or commodity use, etc., could take off and have not only value but a very impressive value. At one point, I would have said, no, that can't happen. You'd have to have some redeemability into something else, or and I was wrong. And that's when I wrote the paper, because I was wrong.
Well, there's a guy, Joel Valenzuela. He's at Desert Links, I think is his name on Twitter. And I remember a long time ago, he said, it's like the first time where people are financially motivated to spread the word, right? They literally get financial reward if they can effectively market the money that they've bought. Now, granted, you do that in stocks and stuff like that, but it was such a new thing, and then it's accelerated enough to continue to fulfill this narrative. So it's kind of interesting. So let's transition, because I know you're almost out of time, but the strategic Bitcoin reserve, just generally, what are your I don't know, reactions? What do you think might happen? What would be the net effect of it if you were to see it happen?
Well, I'll make it brief, because I have written 2 fairly long essays dealing with aspects of this idea. I'm not a fan of it at all, mostly because the arguments for having a strategic Bitcoin reserve all strike me as completely bogus. And I want to be clear here. I'm speaking particularly for arguments that would have the United States buy a government buy a large quantity of Bitcoin, like a million Bitcoin, or even 4 million. I'm not talking about arguments for having it keep the Bitcoin it already possesses. Anyway, all the arguments I've seen are bogus. One group of arguments that I've written against says, oh, this is going to help bolster the dollar, having these reserve assets. But that Bitcoin reserve won't do anything for the dollar, because the dollar doesn't need any reserve assets. It doesn't have any now. The gold that is held, as we mentioned before, is a legacy. It's a vestige of the days when the dollar was a redeemable currency, redeemable in gold. We accumulated tons of the stuff before Nixon closed the gold window, and now we've still got a lot of it, but it doesn't hold up the value of the dollar anymore. The other argument is that this is a gamble worth taking because we can pay off the debt. The government buys a bunch of Bitcoin, holds it for 20 years, and then has a lot more resources with which to pay off the debt. Well, there's two reasons why this argument is flawed. First of all, even though it's not obvious from the plan, and here I'm speaking particularly of the Lummis plan, the strategic Bitcoin. It's the Bitcoin Act that spells it out. That plan involves implicit borrowing. It's not obvious, but in fact, they're going to remonetize the gold stock, and then they're going to use the funds from that to buy the Bitcoin. That's going to add to bank reserves. To make a long story short, the Bitcoin the government buys would have to be worth at least 2.5 times as much as it pays for it, according to my calculations, in 20 years for there to be anything left extra from which to pay off the debt. So it's not the Bitcoin doesn't just have to maintain its value. It doesn't just have to go up a little. It has to go more than double its price in 20 years and more like 2.5 times its price. Can that happen? Yes. Will it happen? It's quite a risk. It's a gamble, and I don't think it's a good gamble for the government to take. The other problem, though, is even if the gamble paid off, I'll bet you anything that come the time when the government could start selling the Bitcoin and paying off the debt with the proceeds. Everybody who supports this strategic Bitcoin reserve plan now, who says the government should buy up Bitcoin, is going to say they shouldn't sell it then. And there will be all kinds of pressure to not sell the Bitcoin. And it'll end up being as permanent a stock as the gold we're already stuck with. And so,
or they would front run it, or they'd front run the government. They'd sell all their own coins.
How did they sell all that Bitcoin without tanking the whole market, right?
Once the government has bought that Bitcoin, it's going to have a gigantic Bitcoin reserve that it never gets rid of, which means it can't pay off the debt or do anything else with this. It has simply created capital gains for the Bitcoin holders out there, and that is all that it'll accomplish. And that I don't think is something. That's not a good enough reason for the government to do it.
Do you think they're holding the gold today for that reason, that they don't want to crush the gold market?
Yes, they have expressed that concern in the past when they've been encouraged to consider selling the gold. But that's an argument for selling it slowly. It's not an argument for never selling it. And there are a number of central banks in the world that had substantial gold stocks, nothing like ours, but still proportionately pretty substantial, that did sell them off slowly. Canada took about 5 decades, got rid of almost all its gold, and other central banks have done it too. I think we should sell the gold rather than buy the Bitcoin. If the idea is to pay off the debt, you could do that by selling the gold right now and without any speculation, right? You wouldn't have to speculate, but they won't do it. So I don't think a Bitcoin reserve is going to do anything but give the government another strategic pile of stuff that it doesn't do anything with.
And Fort Knox must be quite expensive to operate, right? Sorry.
Yeah, well, to give Bitcoin strategic reserve advocates their due, at least it wouldn't be as costly to store the Bitcoin. Presumably, it'll be less costly to store. I don't know if it'll be less costly to audit it to see that it's all there. I'm not so sure how that would work.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, when I was writing this down, they've called it the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. They started abbreviating it to the SBR. And anytime anybody starts applying acronyms and capitalizing words unnecessarily, be prepared for the bullshit because it's about to come in. You know what I mean? It's a three-letter
The one
agency.
that gets me is people who capitalize Fed, F-E-D, as if it stood for federal, I don't know what.
Extraction device.
Yeah, something like that.
I've probably done that. I've capitalized the F. I don't think I've
No,
capitalized.
the F should be capitalized. It's a proper
Yeah.
name, but not. It shouldn't be written F-E-D because that would suggest that it's an acronym, which it isn't.
Do you have optimism before you go? Do you have optimism? I've always felt the biggest enemy of Bitcoin or of cryptocurrencies is a rationally managed Fed and federal government, right? If we got our spending in line, we actually did our best and could maintain 2% inflation or whatever the target is and didn't get wasteful. Do you have any optimism that we could ever get back to that closely? I mean, it's been so wild since 2001. George W. Bush, before him, it wasn't that bad. Is there ever a way to get back to that?
Well, I think there is. I'm part of a group of economists who've argued that the Fed needs to concentrate on stabilizing total spending in the economy and forget about trying to target inflation, at least explicitly. And I think that if they did that, we'd have a much more stable macroeconomy. But of course, even if they took that step, we still have to get our banking regulations right and our general financial regulations, because what makes banks and financial firms fail often is macroeconomic instability is a factor, an important one, but so is bad regulations. And we still have plenty of very bad regulations, bad supervision. A lot of other things have to be improved before we can say we're not in for another crisis.
Okay.
The safe bet now is we will have another crisis. Because not enough has changed. Not enough has changed.
Well, yeah, I don't know if you heard he and I talking before. It's the over politicization of everything. It's that again, it's the adults in the room thing. We can't have rational conversations and make rational policy if we can't trust each other and try to actually work moving forward for the betterment of everyone as opposed to avoiding disaster. But do you have any last questions, Animal, before we jump off?
No, I guess, like you were just saying, do you feel optimistic about the incoming administration and its ability to change things for the better?
Well, I think it will change. It is changing things. But
I saw Facebook, right?
I can only speak about the monetary and financial policy. I think that guardedly. I'm always guardedly. I'm never optimistic. I am at best guardedly optimistic there. But I don't want to suggest that all of the new administration's policies in other areas are going to be an improvement. There's a lot of crazy ideas being bandied about that don't strike me as particularly smart, but that have nothing to do with my own field. So I don't have any expert opinion about them.
Fair enough. You want to talk to us about your book quickly?
Of course I do. Thank you. So this is a book I've been working on. I've got to move my computer a little bit because the sun is, I've got to figure out how to keep in the shade. This is a book I've been working on for a few years now on the Great Depression. Specifically, it asks, how did the United States finally get out of it? Because it took us a long time. And how did we get out of it? When did we get out of it? And what role did the New Deal have? Now, the New Deal is the name for the economic policies of the Roosevelt administration that took office in 1933. And what I try to do is to really fairly evaluate those policies and tell the story about the U.S. recovery in a way that doesn't either exaggerate the accomplishments of the New Deal or exaggerate its failures. And it did have both. In the end, I think despite what some people say, they're always, every time we have a new crisis, they're saying, let's have another New Deal. The fact is, as bad as we are at handling crises now, we know a lot more about how to do it correctly than they did back in the 30s. They made a lot of terrible mistakes, including, for example, not using either monetary or fiscal stimulus in a productive way. The other thing I'll say about the book is that it looks at World War II's effect on the recovery in a different way than other works. A lot of people think when we spent so much on World War II, that got the economy out of the recession or depression, and it did, but it doesn't explain why we didn't have another downturn after the war when the government spending went back down again as a percentage of GDP. It went almost all the way back down if you look at all levels of government. And so the real key to answering the question, what allowed the U.S. to recover from the Great Depression, is the answer to the question, why didn't we have another one after World War II? So you have to be able to answer that, and then you've got it. And I do answer it, but I'm not going to tell anybody how.
No spoilers.
No. I can't give you the solution to the recovery, because that's kind of the teaser. You have to buy the book for that.
The unbridled optimism of the American spirit. That's what it was.
The book is available now on Amazon for advanced orders. It will be actually for sale come mid to late April of this year.
Yeah, and I also looked back, like your list of books you've already written, and I'm like, man, I gotta. This conversation, it's very fulfilling to me. It's hard to have these types of conversations outside of select circles, right? So, I really appreciate you coming in. And
well, not at all. It's kind of you to invite me, and I appreciate the conversation as well.
I hope we had some interesting questions for you, and who knows, maybe we'll come back when the book comes out and see what happens. All right.
That'd be fun. Thank you, Grant. And
thank you very much. I appreciate it, George.
Thank you.
So long, fellas.
All right, there we go. He's in the background now. Man, that was a lot. That was a lot to absorb.
Yeah, very informative. Was it? Look, I'll throw up a comment Master said, and I think it would be cool to see George at the summit. Definitely would have a lot to talk about. And his insights, yeah. I'm looking forward to his book. I wonder if he's got a EPUB version out.
I hate to say this. I'm really bad about it. I'm not a big reader. I need to start doing books on tape or something. Like, I like taking a walk, listening to a podcast. I listen to all sorts of stuff, but I don't know what it is about sitting down and reading. I don't like it. Although I think with that type of content, I might be more apt to do that. And who knows? Maybe it'd be a good hobby.
If it's something that catches your interest, it'll be easier. But definitely, everyone's got a little bit of ADD, and with the internet and the algorithms, the way they're tuned, it certainly exacerbates it for some people. Reading is the antidote, I would say. At least for me, I find that if I try to read a few times a week, I'm able to, like, it's a little hard to get into it at first, but once I get into the habit, I find it a lot easier just to blast through a book.
Yeah.
But yeah, it definitely helps with my attention span outside of that activity, right?
I'm finding myself pretty much like, I don't really care to watch. My family will watch television or YouTube or something, and I like some shows, but for the most part, I do find myself bored. I've been filling that time with these kind of I like video games that are kind of puzzly type of ones. So that's kind of what I spend my time. I'm like, maybe I should start reading instead,
Yeah. It's hard to compete with the media these days. Like, the video games and the TV shows are coming out are just outdoing each other every year. It feels like, at least.
Yep, for sure. Well, that was great. Yeah, that was fun. I think hopefully we can get into maybe have him back in a few months or something like that. But I we'll see what happens. I like that he's cautiously optimistic. What did he say? I forget what his phrasing was. Guarded.
Guarded, right? Yeah.
And I feel the same way. I hope that there has been a shift. There has been a shift in attitude, and let's hope that that's what is changing. Even if the people that the major people that are making noise in the media aren't exactly saying the things we want to say, that they're going to put people in place that have the right ideas in mind.
And I mean, just look what happened this week with Facebook, right? And how they came out and said that, and admitted flat out that they were being censored, and that they're going to be doing better from now on, not censoring people, not banning people, allowing things to be out there, even if they're not 100% accurate, or they might be against what the government wants them to say, right? They're saying they're not going to bend to the FBI's requests for censorship.
You know what I'd like to see? I'm surprised that these platforms, and maybe they will as X develops and as Facebook, if they do truly let people start to have free speech, is the ability for the user to curate the experience a little more. Because I even find I get on
customize the algorithm.
What's that?
To customize their own algorithm.
Yeah, because there's things that come up on Twitter, and I'm like, dude, this is not. I don't want Twitter to turn into this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Call it. There's a lot of stuff on there that I don't mind seeing it. It's not like it's offensive to me. I just think like that's not putting me in the mindset that I want to be in. And to be able to procure your view might be the way to go. Maybe that's just changing who you follow and muting people more.
Things like car crashes and fights. Yeah, that's what I do. I like pictures of cats and animals and cute stuff like that. And if I see something that makes it hard for me to sleep at night because I don't know, whatever, gory, for example, I'll mute that account and that post. And frankly, I think it does help on every platform. So, yeah, but I see what you're saying. You can tune it specifically. I think I'm on Blue Sky, but not really active on it. And I think I heard of a way that you can customize your algorithm there somehow. I'm not sure how it works.
Or even maybe X has procured experiences where I can log on to X, maybe call it X Blue or X Red or X Open, where like they, or X, I don't want to call it kids, but maybe that's like, you know what, this is going to be a side of X that automatically filters U.S. politics or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And you're motivated to self-identify as like, well, I want to talk about politics, so I want to be on the politics one. And so then in order to get on there, you have to self-identify, which allows you to also be filtered out. I don't know. I feel like there's got to be some things that can be done because, yeah, free speech, of course, you don't want to stop people from speaking, but it would be nice to be able to procure your experience. So I wouldn't doubt if we're going to see that.
Yeah, I see. Like maybe different channels for trending items, like a sports channel, world news channel, sure. U.S. news channel, something like that.
Yeah, sports. Perfect example.
Focused. Yeah. Yeah, that would be cool. I think
why don't they have X? Why don't we have Xmail yet? I was thinking about the other day. It'd be so nice to be able to email. I was going to send you a file. Oh, my Litecoin thesis, which I'm going to repost on Monday. But I was going to send that to you, and I'm like, oh, it'd be so nice if I could just attach this file in a DM, or even if you just had an email address that's. Are there Twitter/X email addresses? I'm surprised there's not.
Unless you work there.
Like
you got to be an employee.
Like if you're like a blue checkmark user, are you allowed to send or receive? And then obviously if somebody abuses that, they could lose their X privileges. Seems like it.
No, so I guess it makes sense. Yeah, you can't send files, just pictures, right?
Well, you can on your desktop, I think, right? Or can you send? I don't know. I swear I was trying to send you a message and I couldn't do it. We're getting sidetracked here. Yeah,
Yes,
how are you sending files? I don't have that option on my PC.
Okay. Well,
Don't
we
lie
can
to
work
me.
on that later. Yeah. Yes. Here's Mattress Thing. Zuck has a lot of damage. Yeah, he's done a lot of damage for sure. And he has a lot to undo. I'd like to see him try. I mean, he definitely has an amends to make. It's better than nothing, better late than never. He can be a powerful ally to free speech, the most powerful practically after Elon. But yeah, definitely keep a close eye on him. Hold him to his word. And see,
Yeah,
in the next 4 years after we have a different administration, if he changes code again.
Well, I talked to, I'm going to mention him again, that rare passenger. We had just such a long conversation and we went down these rabbit holes. And one of the things that we talked about was like in this attention economy where it's like, it's about getting clicks. It's about getting people to notice you. The thing that sustains like an account, or when you start to trust somebody or you start to believe them, is for them to tell the truth consistently and act in a way consistently that you can begin to believe there's no reason for me to believe this person's lying to me intentionally or, malicious, or they're grifting in any way. It's like a proof of work, right? Like it'd be nice to get to a place where we can have people that become trusted because they are trustworthy. And so Zuckerberg, it's a good turn of events. I don't even know that like I necessarily want to sit here and say he's been evil in the past or something, but he's been a tool. He's allowed himself to be taken advantage of in a way. He has not stood up for truth and honesty. So he has to reestablish that proof of work in a way.
To be fair, he is a young man. He's my age, and started this company, with all this responsibility thrust upon himself. So I don't envy his position in having to manage this thing and be perfect on his first try. There's obviously not like a big opportunity for him to improve and to change, and I think we should give him an opportunity to do so.
I also think he's going to go out of business if he doesn't. I think there's a big reason he changed. Maybe
they do have they have such like a first mover advantage with this stuff. It's not even first mover, but they've got they're in such a comfortable position with everyone still using Facebook as like it's the most common denominator social network, right?
Dude, I go there now. I go there and it's a lot of ads. There's a lot less engagement than there used to be.
Right. But it's still the only place you can reach out to like but it's still for me the only place I can talk to like my oldest friends, you know what I mean? It's my address book for so many things and people.
True.
The common one. And that's worth a lot. And WhatsApp, a lot of people use it. Instagram, a lot of people still use it, despite the fact that it's I don't like either of those platforms, and I don't trust Meta. But I don't see them going anywhere.
Yeah, frankly, again, it goes back to like a more procured experience. Facebook is more of a personal experience, your personal life. And maybe that's what they have to lean into. Because it's not, I don't think it's going to be the town hall. Because it's your personal life, it doesn't become the town hall. Because people don't want to.
I think you definitely have to have this segmented, right? For me, like this is the thing. Like I don't want everyone I've ever known to see like what I did last weekend. I don't like. Come on, man.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say to hear your political views.
Right. Like it's just so bizarre, for people to do that. Like for me, I just find it weird behavior. And the other thing is, I feel like the phone system, like cell phone numbers or telephone numbers, I feel like it's such a like a relic of the past.
Yep.
And it's like such a huge attack vector for scammers, for state nations, nefarious individuals, etc., what have you. I find it bizarre that we can't buy a SIM card with just a data plan in Canada. I don't know if it's the same in the States, but every time you buy a SIM card here, you've got to tie it to a phone number. I don't want a phone number. I just want the internet. Can we have that, please? Like, can we make it so that, instead of, I don't know, your bank or your dentist calling you on your cell phone number, can they just hit me up on Facebook? Right?
Yeah.
Like, and just cut that that archaic, vulnerable infrastructure out of the picture completely. I know what's holding us back right now. Is it the boomers? I think it's the boomers. I think there's some people that will never buy a cell phone and never
Oh
have a
no,
Facebook.
everybody's got cell phones, but I agree with you on the number thing. It's maybe just the fact it's your phone app, and if you had a Google phone, right? Is that what you normally use, or you use like a Telegram phone or something, right?
Yeah, well, no, I do have, I use encrypted messaging as much as possible. I'm not at all. Come on, guys. But
it is funny, like when you call people on Twitter, right? Like it just the username pops up and you call, and it's using whatever the same tech Spaces is using. By the way, speaking of what you just said, Stack Mobile is supposed to be live here in about 4 or 5 days.
Oh yeah,
where you can start getting paid to use or get rebates on your phone and paid in crypto. So I'm hoping to, I don't know, I got to talk to them again, maybe get a promo code or something, save some people some extra money. But that, everything's there, Animal, it's like all these things are available. It's just who's going to put them together in a way that like what George was saying with how Bitcoin, with how it's probably one word, quick swap.
Oh,
with how George was saying, it was pretty remarkable for Bitcoin to establish itself against all these network effects. I think the same thing is with like you said, with the phone number. Yeah, I think it's just comfort when all you do is you click, I go to my favorites, I click a name. I don't dial numbers very often. There's still a lot of business numbers that exist, but if I could access those without having a phone plan, then I wouldn't need a phone.
Right. Like they should have a Facebook account, right? And a lot of businesses do.
People have desk phones still, you know what I mean? Not everybody has those accounts, so it's just a matter of like, I don't know. It's there, but you'd have to get adoption, and eventually it's like
make
cutting
it a standard,
the cord, like cable,
tie it
eventually.
And it's kind of a dangerous thing because then it kind of would force people to tie their numbers potentially to the Facebook accounts, which then would maybe in some cases make it so that they have to tie it to their social insurance number to ensure that they're the actual person, right? And so it kind of introduces this whole Orwellian concept of identification in every aspect of our lives. But maybe there's a way around it to make it flexible so people can remain anonymous when they want. I don't see why. I don't have a problem telling the government exactly who I am and them hitting me up on my official Facebook. But if I make friends, maybe I don't know, in another country or whatever, like I don't want to necessarily have to mix everyone into the same basket. Probably have a secondary account, right? That doesn't require me to KYC and all that stuff.
Yeah, you're like, hey, one singular account would be great, and then you're like, well, wait a minute, then I got all the things I say on X. I can't. Oh, my family's gonna know about all that. Yeah. I don't think people want that in a way, and that's like those procured experiences that maybe we'll see. I don't know. Interesting. You mentioned Facebook, and you're like that you don't think Zuckerberg's a bad guy, and I don't. I want to do more research, but do you pay any attention to Whitney Webb? Do you know who she is?
I've heard of her. She's got she's a Bitcoiner, right? But also a very liberal Bitcoiner.
I don't know.
Is she not in the podcast?
She's like I don't even know whether to believe her or not. A lot. I want to do more reading of her, but she's very much into this concept of like the alignment of tech and the state through people like Peter Thiel, PayPal, Facebook, what Zuckerberg has done, and even Elon Musk where he will say one thing, but not necessarily his actions don't always match those things. So I want to do a lot more reading about it, but her kind of fear is that, yeah, you're going to see a CBDC. They're going to usher in digital IDs. You had the left loved it during COVID, but you had, they were like, yeah, let's start tracking people, right? They're almost very pro digital ID, where the right was against it. And now it's like, maybe it's voter ID, or it's anti-immigration policies, or it's anti-terrorism, like the guy who blows up his truck in New Orleans. And like one of the first reactions is, it becomes about immigration or race or, Islamophobia again. Yeah. When that really doesn't have anything to do with that guy who's in the military. I think he was a U.S. citizen, right? But and like playing both sides to bring people to the mutual understanding that, yeah, we need a digital ID. You're just going to sell it to them differently, and so then you start tying your money to your digital ID. I don't know. Interesting.
Yeah, that kind of does worry me, and that I feel like there's a lot of benefits to be had in making things more efficient, but there's also a lot of dangers and it being able to be used to deperson you a lot quicker.
Right, that's what I mean.
I'm really concerned with the archaic phone system, cell phone system, and I don't want a phone number. I don't think we should be using it. If this is a way to guarantee that would happen, I mean, I'll put that in the cons, in the pros column, right? Like
of a phone.
There'd be still the cons column there. We'll have a whole bunch of stuff that worries me and it would probably keep me up at night, but that'd be one of the pros of that happening for sure.
Yeah, so Starlink is this brilliant, he deployed free Starlink out to LA, and I think it's a really cool thing. You could usurp the phone companies and everybody could operate on Starlink, but it's like, well, he's the only one with hardware in space. You know what I'm saying? He's the only one who's got satellites up there. And so you do end up funneling yourself into this. Well, now I'm a Starlink user. And if you abolish the other systems, then you're in a world of fucking hurt.
Actually, I hadn't thought of that. Is it possible that the Starlink phones don't have phone numbers? They just have Wi-Fi?
Probably. I don't know. I would assume.
That'd be pretty cool.
I mean, maybe they use them as like a redundant, just familiarity feature, but it doesn't seem like it doesn't need it in any way.
I mean, I don't even know if
we needed phone numbers for how. I mean, it had to do something with the switches or how you connected to people. I'm not even sure how it initially. It must have sent pulses through the line.
Certainly, grandfathered in.
Trying to reach.
Yeah.
The ghost in the machine. The ghost in the machine.
Yeah. Now that, especially since we're using like LTE and 5G stuff, there's no way that they still require your phone number to route phone calls or data to your phone.
Right.
There's no way. It's just grandfathered in, and it's pretty. Yeah.
And yet they keep adding digits, like my area code, more area codes. It's like, why? This is ridiculous.
I mean, think of all the people who've been scammed, right, from robocalls and stuff. Like these are like the majority of phone calls. I want to say like 90% of them. I don't use it. That's probably part of the reason. But like, I still get like 3 calls a week from a robocaller. To the point where like when I answer my phone, I'm like, who is it? Like I wait for them to talk to make sure it's not a machine. It's really quite useless.
Yeah, I use it. Even for work, I rarely get an incoming call for work. But if it is, it's somebody I know, a customer or something. I do outbound calls to people I don't know because I'm a salesperson. But for your personal life, you're just hitting the button, just hit their name on the contact list, and it wouldn't matter what backing that up. A number is meaningless. So, yeah, you're probably right. I think we'll probably see the elimination of phone numbers, and it probably will die with maybe my generation. I'm a Gen Xer. I'm a late Gen Xer. Boomers,
you can adapt. You guys are good at adapting.
Yeah, because you won't. There's no. It doesn't mean it's meaningless. If I click the button that says Animal Litecoin, or I click the button with a phone number on it, it doesn't. My experience with it doesn't mean anything. And if they're using the same system, you're right. I'm surprised we still have them, honestly.
Yeah,
it's probably some stupid ass regulation, like George. Just some.
I think it could be more nefarious than that. Like, I think it's convenient. I think it's a good way for law enforcement to track people that they want to track, right? Setting
Phone
up those
numbers?
stinger,
Like
yeah, setting up those stingray, cell phone interception devices. I think makes it a lot harder for people to just, change numbers and hide that way. I guess maybe they could just get a burner if they're really interested, but yeah, I don't know. It forces people to default to an unencrypted messaging algorithm. Like SMS is just plain text, right? Unless you're using iCloud.
that's all. It's
And
all
if
good.
okay, plain text it's unencrypted basically. So when you're using text messaging, it's unencrypted, and anyone can read that. That is on the wire.
Gotcha.
iCloud does fix that, or was it iMessage rather? However, if you're talking with someone on Android and you see that, that was it blue or green. I'm not sure what Android users look like on iPhones, but I think they're green. Then the whole conversation gets downgraded. So, yeah, I don't know. It's I think it has to do with maybe an FBI mandate that would have to come up. Like I know, like since Trump got reelected, the FBI has been talking favorably about using encrypted messaging services. Perhaps they can be the ones to place this mandate at a broader scale.
Right.
And then once, of course, the United States do it, Canada and Europe will follow. Then, of course, the world. So yeah, a lot can happen in the next 4 years. I hope this is one of them.
Yeah. Well, that's a minor fix. We got phone numbers in 4 years, but we're paying off the national debt. Maybe that's better. Or you guys are gonna have a better.
Pick your battles.
You got rid of Justin Trudeau resigned. You got to be thrilled.
Yeah, I mean, kind of not really. We're not getting an opportunity to have another election until March, which isn't the best. Had he not stepped down, there would have been a vote of non-confidence, probably the same day or the next day. But since he stepped down, he managed to prorogue the government, which means everyone's out and not working. And he's given himself until March to find a replacement for him for the Liberal Party, at which point the opposition will be able to start another vote of non-confidence and attempt for a new election, another election. So the earliest we'll see an election happening, I think, is probably April. But I hope we do get one, because I believe that the current government's been kind of failing, and especially with Trump being in the States, I don't know. We need to have our.
What is it that triggered it? What was the big event that really just made it like him make this decision? Because I feel like I must have missed something, because I was like, wait a minute, why all
That's hard to say. I mean, why has there been such an overwhelming backlash against him? I think it's a number of factors. Definitely, the whole trucker protests and how he dealt with them, like, really upset some people that'll never forgive him.
So then, of course, there's major in the last like 3 or 4 weeks where it was like a controversy.
The economy, it's the price of housing, and how his finance minister, he basically kind of was going to throw his finance minister under the bus. And before he had an opportunity,
wrote some note or something, right? She
right.
front ran him. Yeah, I think I heard.
Right, she resigned the day she was supposed to announce, I guess, the last quarter's budget plan, because there's like there was nothing good in that report, I assume. I guess we still haven't seen it yet. Like, the person that was supposed to do it after she resigned also declined and resigned instead of posting that report. So yeah, it just goes to show you.
He was going to throw her under the bus.
Yeah,
and she said, "No, screw that," and so she threw him under the bus, right? And published.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay. Now I'm vaguely remembering that.
Yeah, so I don't know. She might be the next leader of the Liberal Party. We'll see. I don't know. Honestly, I don't pay that much attention to Canadian politics as much as I should, just because I think politics are really boring. I like it when they're boring, but yeah, we'll see what happens. I mean, the housing pricing is insane. Crime rates are through the roofs. You know, auto theft has risen so much. And I think it is time for the government to step up and do something to fix the situation, if they can, before it gets even worse and too late. I mean, if we keep on this track, I think it might be possible for Trump to buy Canada on pennies to a dollar. You know what I mean? Within his 4-year tenure. So
I mean, it has happened. Maps have not changed very much in the last 100 years.
Yeah.
Since World War II, really. So who knows? Or really, since the end of the Cold War, there hasn't been a whole lot of evolution. Maybe there's transition is coming, but yeah, I mean, it sounds like Greenland almost sounds like it's going to be a done deal, which is pretty wild.
Is that right?
We'll have you surrounded. We'll have Canada surrounded. Who knows?
Yeah.
But well, hey, let's wrap it up. I think should be back next week. I don't know if we have anything on the calendar specifically, but poker tonight. I think I'm going to play. I don't know for sure, but 8:00 tonight. If you're interested in playing, you can DM me or I guess Animal too. But Chief Litecoin is the one that runs it. I think is he Chief _ Litecoin? I never remember, or not. No, he's just Chief Litecoin.
It's 0.5.
He doesn't even look like a chief to me. Honestly, he doesn't even look like an.
I don't know what. Okay.
I think this is just a
0.5 LTC buy-ins is a minimum, and yeah, did he say up to 1.5 maximum?
I don't know. I do, Chief. If you're listening, I do think we should change something with the game. That if you like 1 Litecoin equals 1,000 chips, 0.5 Litecoin equals 500 chips. And then like just change the blinds accordingly. I think it'll make payouts easier, and like just trying to get into the dollar amount just seems really silly. Let's make Litecoin the unit of account. So some inside poker talk, Chief, if you want to consider that, I think that'd be easier. But all right. Yeah, let's wrap it up. Everybody, thanks for joining every week, or we can have a good new year. Positivity in 2025. Go get some sunshine as usual, and we'll be seeing you around. All right.